What's going on, guys? It's Greg here, aka NYPrepper. In this video, I just want to talk to you about reloading for dangerous game. So I want to give you my thoughts on why I think it's okay to reload if you're hunting for dangerous game, or if you plan to go on a dream hunt somewhere. I think reloading is fine. There's just some simple guidelines you should follow. So I want to talk to you guys about that, and I want to share with you my thoughts. And first of all, we should talk about why you would reload for dangerous game. First of all, you want to check with your hunting guide or outfitter if he's going to even allow you to use reloads while you're hunting. A lot of guides and outfitters don't like the idea of clients using reloads, because anytime you use a reload, there's always a chance something could go wrong. And when you're dealing with dangerous game, it's no joke. So they prefer their clients use factory ammo. So you definitely want to check with your hunting guide and your outfitter before you bring some reloads onto a safari or a brown bear hunt in Alaska. So assuming that your guide is okay with you using reloads, you've cleared it with him, you've discussed it with him, why would you want to use reloads? Well, first of all, if we're talking about dangerous game, any kind of cartridge designed for dangerous game is going to be very expensive to shoot, because you have cartridges that are what I like to call super magnum cartridges. You're talking about cartridges that can produce over 4,000 or even 5,000 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. You're talking about cartridges that can develop twice the energy of a 30-06. Okay, so the components are a lot more expensive, and as a result, the finished product is going to be more expensive if you're going to be purchasing it off the shelf. Okay, on average, a 20-round box of ammo for any dangerous game cartridge is going to run you about $100, sometimes $150. So it's very hard to practice with your firearm if you're paying that much money for ammunition. Okay, $100 or $150 for 20 rounds. That's a lot of money for most people, and it's going to be very difficult to get a lot of range time in with that kind of cost. Okay, typically most people that hunt dangerous game, they usually just sight in their rifles and shoot the rifle a couple of times, and that's it, because it's just super expensive. If you reload, you can cut that cost by at least 50%, sometimes more, okay? Because the powders and the primers that you're going to be using for your dangerous game cartridges are going to cost the same as for non-dangerous game cartridges. The only things you're going to pay a lot more for are the brass and the projectiles, okay? Because you're dealing with larger projectiles and larger cases, so that's going to cost more. You have more material, so manufacturers of bullets and cases are going to charge you more, okay? But you're going to be able to cut that price in half if you reload, okay? Now, obviously, you're going to have to do your load development. You're going to have to develop loads, which is going to cost a decent amount of money initially. You're going to have to experiment. Once you experiment and you find a good load that has good energy, good velocity, and good accuracy, you can settle on that load, and then you can mass produce and you can practice and do a lot of shooting to get comfortable with your rifle and with the recoil. And you can do different kinds of drills, like an animal charge drill. If you're using factory ammo and you're paying over $100 for a box of 20, you're not going to be able to do a lot of drills and a lot of practice. Okay, so that's a huge benefit to reloading for dangerous game cartridges. Okay, saving a lot of money and being able to practice a lot more. Now, obviously, if you're going to be reloading for dangerous game, you don't want to just do it at the last minute right before you go on your safari or your once-in-a-lifetime hunt, your Kodiak bear hunt, $30,000 hunt. That's very hard to get a permit for. You don't want to start doing your load development 2 months before you go, okay? You want to have your loads developed at least a year in advance before you go on your big trip, okay? So you want to start preparing at least a year ahead of time, okay? This will give you ample time to develop your load or multiple loads, have different loads. You can have your expanding bullets and your solids, and you can test different projectiles. You can see which ones penetrate better, which one your rifle likes better, which ones are more accurate, etc., etc. Okay, load development is a lengthy process, and so you need to have enough time to develop these loads. You don't want to just be rushing at the last minute. So you want to start your load development at least a year ahead of time before you plan to go anywhere. And once you settle on that load or those loads, you want to test those loads in different conditions, okay? Because if we're talking about dangerous game, you want to make sure that your firearm and the projectile do what needs to be done, okay? And with dangerous game, you can't afford to have any malfunctions, okay? If a Cape buffalo is charging you or a brown bear is charging you, if you have a malfunction, that could be a very serious situation. Even if you're with a hunting guide, the hunting guide is obviously going to be backing you up. He's going to have a stopping rifle. If we're talking about Africa, usually at least a 416 of some kind. Usually they carry like 458 lots or 470 nitros, 500 nitros, or even bigger, 505 Gibbs, some kind of heavy double rifle that has a lot of knockdown power and just a massive projectile. So you will have your guide backing you up, but you shouldn't rely on that, especially if you're going to be doing a do-it-yourself hunt. Like if you're hunting in Alaska for bear, if you're a native of Alaska and you're hunting for bear, you're not going to have anybody backing you up if you're doing a solo hunt. So that's even more crucial in that situation to make sure everything functions. So you want to develop your loads, and once you settle on some loads that are accurate, give you good velocity and good energy, you're going to want to test those loads in different conditions, okay? Cold weather, hot weather, and that's critical, especially if you're going to like Africa, where the temperatures go up over 100 degrees during the day, and then they drop down to the 40s at night, okay? Many people don't realize that Africa actually gets cold at night, okay? Temperatures in Africa can drop down into the 30s, almost down to the freezing point, okay? Sometimes there could even be frosts in the morning, and then by midday it's already 100 degrees, okay? So huge temperature swings, a lot of sunshine, and generally speaking, ammunition doesn't like huge temperature swings. So you have to test your loads in different temperatures, especially in the areas you plan to hunt, okay? If you're going to Africa, you need to consider those temperature swings, and you want to make sure that your ammunition performs in both extremes, the cooler side and the hot side especially, all right? You could have an overpressure situation if your ammunition is out in the sun, and that may not necessarily cause your firearm to blow up, but what it could do is it could cause a difficulty in extracting, okay? If you have 120 degree temperatures and you have max loads and those cartridges have been sitting out in the sun, or even if they're not in the sun, it could increase the pressure just enough to the point where you're going to have really sticky extraction. So you need to test your ammo in really hot conditions. If you're going to Africa, if you're going to Alaska, you need to test your loads in cold temperatures to see if you're getting the same velocity numbers in cold temperatures as you do in warmer temperatures, because most people don't do chronographing in colder temperatures. And even temperature stable powders will have some variation in super cold conditions. Okay, so you want to test those temperature extremes. And another reason I forgot to mention why you should reload for dangerous game is to improve performance. Okay, if you're reloading, you can select the best quality bullets, the best powders, the best primers, and more importantly, a combination that your rifle really likes. Okay, factory ammo is generic, and also factory ammo is never loaded to the max. Okay, and that's for liability reasons. Okay, big ammunition companies, they don't want to have people blowing up their firearms, so they download their ammunition below max. So there's a little bit of a gap between max and what their ammunition is. Okay, so people aren't blowing up their rifles, because people have different chamber sizes, different types of firearms that can handle higher pressure, other firearms cannot. So most commercial ammunition is not loaded to the max. So if you reload, you're going to get the maximum performance, not just from sheer velocity and energy levels, but also accuracy. Okay, you're going to be able to fine-tune your ammunition to suit your firearm and find a load that your firearm really likes, which is something that you'll never be able to do with factory ammo. Okay, so that's another big reason to reload for dangerous game, is getting maximum performance in addition to cost savings. Okay, so when it comes to reloading for dangerous game, generally speaking, you're going to have your solids, which you're going to only use for emergency situations, for stopping a charge. And then you're going to have your expanding bullets, which are going to be the first projectiles you're going to use against the dangerous game animal, because the expanding bullets will do the most damage. And so you're going to want to use those expanding bullets first. The quality of those expanding bullets are absolutely critical for dangerous game. They're not super critical for, say, white-tailed deer or elk or even moose, but if you're hunting something that can potentially hurt you or kill you, you want the best quality bullets. And so for expanding bullets, you want something that's tough, that's not going to break apart. So that's a separate topic for another video. I'm not going to talk about bullet selection in this video. All right, I'm just talking about why and certain tips and my thoughts. So like I said, you want to give yourself an entire year to develop these loads, test them, and then settle on a good load. And then you can have ample time to practice in different conditions, in cold, in hot, whatever. Okay, wherever you're going, you should practice and test your ammunition in those conditions where you're going to be hunting. And you can put on your hunting gear and practice with your hunting gear on. Okay, whatever type of gear you plan to wear. All right, clothing. You definitely want to practice with the same clothing you're going to be wearing, especially if you're hunting in colder temperatures. You know, having a lot of layers and bulky clothing will affect how quickly you can bring a rifle up and unsling and things like that. And reloading will help you to do that without breaking the bank, okay, and going into debt trying to buy enough ammunition to practice with. Okay, now some simple guidelines that I would do if I were reloading for a dangerous game safari. Number one is you want to have fresh brass. You don't want to be using brass that you've reloaded like 5 times. In my opinion, 2 or 3 times at the most, for actual ammunition that you're going to bring to your hunt. Okay, because after about 3 reloads, you're running the risk of something happening to that brass. And you know, if you're in a situation where you have a Cape buffalo charging you and you get case head separation or some other kind of malfunction or a catastrophic failure of the case, and you can't extract that case fast enough and chamber a new round fast enough, that's a problem. So use fresh brass, in my opinion, once fired or twice fired at the most. Okay, so that's just my opinion. Okay, you can do whatever you want. Keep in mind, these are my opinions. I'm not telling you what to do, I'm telling you what I would do. All right, so I'm not giving you advice. These are just my opinions, my thoughts. All right, I would not personally use brass that I've fired more than twice if I'm going to use it for dangerous game. All right, if you're going to be making separate batches for training, then yeah, that's fine. You can, reuse the same brass 5 or 10 times until, you start to get split necks or whatever. That's fine because you're just practicing with it, right? But if you're actually going to plan to use this ammunition in the field, in my opinion, once or twice fired, that's it. And you also want to do full-length resizing. You never want a neck size because you want to make sure that you have good extraction, okay? If you just do neck sizing and you're not sizing the entire body of the case, after you fire that round, there's a good chance that you could have sticky extraction, especially if you're in a place like Africa where it gets over 100 degrees and that ammunition gets hot and the pressure builds up and the case expands a lot more than you expected. And then you got to really pull hard on that bolt to get that case out. And at that point, you could be in a bad situation. So always full length resize. You don't want to oversize. Don't follow the instructions from the manufacturers, okay? Because a lot of them will say you got to screw down your die to a certain point. Usually they'll say you screw down your die until it touches the shell holder and then you screw it another half a turn or whatever. If you do that, you'll usually oversize your brass by like 15 thousandths or 10 thousandths, and you're going to really work harden that brass a lot faster, okay? So you want to make sure you're only full length sizing the minimum amount to get to your SAMI specs or until you can easily chamber that case without feeling any tightness, okay? You should never feel any tightness when you put that empty case into your chamber after resizing, full length resizing, and you close the bolt. You don't want to feel any tightness because if it's tight, cold, okay, not fired at all, it's going to be even tighter after you fire, okay? So you don't want any tightness. You want a little bit of slop, actually. You want it to be a little bit loose in the chamber, which is opposite from what a lot of bench rest shooters will do, or a lot of people who chase accuracy. They want as tight of a fit between the case and the chamber as possible, so the bullet is as much in line with the bore as possible. So when that bullet jumps to the rifling, it's not going to yaw as much and affect accuracy. But if we're talking about dangerous game, your shots are going to be under 200 yards. And, having quarter MOA accuracy is not important, okay? Really, 1 or 2 MOA is fine, all right? It's much better to be able to place those hits properly and, repeatedly, rather than having something that's really accurate, but, you're going to have difficulty extracting and ejecting. So, you want to full length size your brass. You don't want to just neck size. And another thing too is you want to make sure that you seat your primers deep enough, okay? If you don't seat your primers deep, what could happen is you could have a situation where your primer doesn't detonate, okay? Because if your primer is not seated deep enough, what'll happen is when the firing pin hits the primer, if there's a little bit of a gap between the primer and the primer pocket, the firing pin will actually push the primer a little bit deeper into the primer pocket, and it won't actually punch into the primer itself and detonate. You want to seat those primers deep, and you want a full length resize. You want to get your case into SAMI specs. When I say SAMI specs, I'm talking about base to datum line. You should know your base to datum line measurement, and you want to size your case down until it gets within the SAMI specs. There's usually a 7 to 10 thousandths range for your base to datum line. And if you're in the SAMI spec, you're good. You know that that case is going to feed well, it's going to extract well. Even if there's overpressure, you have a little bit of room, okay, because you sized it into SAMI spec. You still have a little bit of slop in there, so even if you have an overpressure situation like with Africa, the hot sun, the case is going to expand, but it's not going to make it so difficult to extract because you're still going to have a lot of room left in the chamber, and so you'll still be able to get that case out, okay? And, you know, full-length resizing, in addition to just pressure, I mean, you also got to think about like debris and dirt and dust getting on your case and into your chamber. And if everything is just neck sized or you're not full-length sizing enough, what'll happen is, you know, you're going to have a really tight fit in that chamber, and you get any kind of dirt or something in that chamber, and you're going to have difficulty extracting or feeding. So it's better to size it a little bit more than a little bit less, okay? But you don't want to oversize like 10 thousandths, all right, because you're going to work hard on your brass unnecessarily. So you want to size back down to the SAMI specs. Usually if you size down like 3 thousandths, that's usually plenty. Some guys will say size back 1 thousandth, but sometimes if you size back 1 thousandth, it's not enough to get that nice feeding and nice extraction. It's still going to be kind of tight. Okay, don't listen to what bench rest shooters tell you. You want to think about dangerous game. That's a completely different ball game, okay? So here I have some reloads that I made. Here we have a 300 Win Mag with a 210 grain solid. And I've actually tested this against 2x10 lumber. And this thing can penetrate 17 pieces of 2x10 lumber. Okay, Douglas fir, that is ridiculous. It's a lot of wood. Here I have a 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum hand load. It's a 400 grain solid. This thing is also a monster penetrator. Okay, here I have a 300 Rum, also a 210 grain solid. And then here I have a 416 400 grain brass solid that I'm going to start doing some load development for. So that's pretty much it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I do think you can reload for dangerous game. Just check with your hunting guide and your outfitter. Make sure they're okay with it, and make it clear that you've practiced with this ammunition. Another thing with practicing with your reloads is if there's any issue with the load, you can figure it out, you know, months ahead of time, and by testing it and shooting it extensively, you'll figure out if there's any issues with the primer. Are you seating the primer deep enough? Are you having inconsistency problems? Is the bullet not good enough? Is, you know, the bullet lower quality or not what you expected, or, you know, the accuracy, whatever. You can work out those kinks if you give yourself at least a year in advance to test your loads and develop them. And if you tell that to a hunting guide or an outfitter, they'll be pretty confident. You explain to them that, you know, you've been reloading for a while and you've spent at least a year developing these loads and testing them, and you're confident in them. I don't think they would have a problem with it, you know, as long as you can explain to them and demonstrate to them that you know what you're doing, and then prove to them when you get there. Usually they have you do a sight-in, okay? And so, you know, if you can prove to them, they'll probably be okay with it. And you definitely want to take some factory ammo with you on your trip, just in case something happens. You always want to have some factory ammo. But that's pretty much it, guys. I think reloading is good for dangerous game. I think you can do it. You know, and for more of my reloading content, check out my reloading playlist. I'll leave a link in the top right corner. Take care, God bless, and don't forget the 3 Ps. Prepare, practice, and persevere.